The sun is a blood-red disk hanging over the desert. 3,000 knights in full armor stand shoulder to shoulder. Their horses are snorting, stamping, ready. Across from them, an ocean of warriors, 30,000 men, maybe more. The largest Muslim army anyone has ever seen in one place. Between them, half a mile of scorched earth. A king raises his sword. No speech, no prayer, just one word. Now. The ground explodes. What you're about to hear didn't make it into your history books, not because it wasn't important, but because it was too important. September 7th, 1191, Arsuf, near modern-day Israel. This is the day Richard the Lionheart, King of England, barely 34 years old, led what military historians still call the most devastating cavalry charge in medieval history. 17 minutes. That's all it took. When the dust settled, Saladin's army was shattered. Thousands dead, thousands more running for their lives. And the Third Crusade, which everyone thought was already lost, suddenly had a pulse again. But here's what they don't tell you. This wasn't just a battle. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare so brutal, so precise, that it changed the entire course of the Crusades. And you're not ready for how dark it gets. Let's rewind. Summer of 1191. The Holy Land is a war zone. For 2 years, Christians and Muslims have been ripping each other apart over one city, Jerusalem. Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the most feared Muslim general alive, took Jerusalem back in 1187. It was a massacre. Christian knights slaughtered, churches burned, the Holy Sepulchre, the site where Jesus was supposedly buried, back in Muslim hands. Europe lost its mind. 3 kings gathered the largest Crusader army ever assembled: Richard of England, Philip of France, Frederick Barbarossa of Germany. Their mission? Take Jerusalem back, at any cost. But it went wrong from the start. Frederick drowned crossing a river in Turkey. His army fell apart. Philip showed up, helped Richard capture one city, Acre, then quit and went home. So now it's just Richard, one king, one army, against Saladin's empire. And Richard's army is dying, not from battle, from the march. Picture this. You're a knight in full chainmail and plate armor. It's 110 degrees in the desert sun. You've been marching for 6 days straight down the coast. No shade, limited water, barely any food. Your horse is limping. Your squire collapsed 2 miles back. And you can hear them, Saladin's cavalry. They've been following you for days, not attacking head-on. That's not his style. He's a chess player. He sends wave after wave of light cavalry, archers on horseback, to harass you. They ride in fast, fire arrows into your lines, ride out before you can respond, over and over and over. Your friends are dying, not from sword wounds, from exhaustion, from heat stroke. Some just stop walking, sit down, wait to die. Saladin doesn't even need to fight you. He's just waiting for you to break. But Richard has a plan, and it's insane. September 6th, 1191. Richard's army reaches Arsuf, a small fortress town on the coast. They're exhausted, starving, barely holding it together. Saladin knows this is his moment. He's been chasing Richard for weeks. Now he has him trapped. Mountains on one side, the sea on the other. Saladin assembles the largest force he's ever commanded in one place. Sources say 30,000 men. Some say more. Cavalry, infantry, archers, siege engines. The entire Muslim world is watching. If Saladin destroys Richard here, the Crusades are over. Jerusalem stays Muslim. Europe stays humiliated. But Richard isn't trying to run. He's been letting Saladin chase him. Every step of this march has been calculated. He kept his army in tight formation, a moving fortress, infantry on the outside, knights on the inside, crossbowmen in the rear. Saladin's archers couldn't break through. They'd fire thousands of arrows, most just bounced off shields and armor. Richard's men would keep marching, like machines. And now, at Arsuf, Richard does something no one expects. He stops retreating. He turns around, and he waits. Here's where it gets crazy. Saladin thinks he has Richard cornered. He orders a full assault. 30,000 warriors, all at once. The noise is deafening. Drums pounding, war cries in Arabic, hooves thundering. They charge from 3 sides. The plan? Overwhelm Richard's army, break their lines, slaughter them in the chaos. But Richard doesn't move. His knights are begging him to charge. They're warriors. They want to fight. They're tired of being target practice. But Richard refuses. He just waits. This is psychological warfare at its peak. Richard knows something Saladin doesn't. Heavy cavalry, knights in full armor on massive war horses, are the most devastating weapon in medieval warfare, but only if you use them right. Charge too early, the horses get tired, the enemy scatters, you lose momentum. But if you wait, if you let the enemy come close, if you let them think they're winning, then you hit them like a hammer. One charge, one moment, maximum impact. Richard is waiting for that moment, and his men are about to lose their minds. Saladin's forces slam into Richard's lines. Arrows are raining down like hail. Some of Richard's knights have 10, 15 arrows sticking out of their armor. Horses are screaming, collapsing. The infantry are holding the line, but barely. And still, Richard won't give the order. One night, a Hospitaller commander rides up to Richard. His face is red. He's furious. "My men are dying. Give us the order." Richard stares at him. "Not yet." "My lord, we cannot hold." "Not yet." But the Hospitallers can't take it anymore. These are warrior monks. They live to fight, and they've been getting slaughtered for an hour. Without Richard's order, without permission, 2 Hospitaller knights break formation. They lower their lances, they dig their spurs into their horses, and they charge. The rest of the Hospitallers see them go, and they follow. Suddenly, 100 knights are thundering toward Saladin's lines. Richard sees it happen. For a moment, everything hangs in the air. His entire strategy, his whole plan just fell apart. If the charge fails, his army is finished. He has one choice: go all in. Richard raised his sword high and roared one word: charge! 3,000 knights, full armor, war horses bred for battle, lances leveled. They hit Saladin's lines like a freight train made of steel. The first line of Muslim infantry doesn't just fall, they're obliterated. Horses weighing over a ton, moving at 30 miles per hour, slam into human bodies. Men are crushed, trampled, thrown into the air. The knights don't slow down. They punch through the first line, the second, the third. Lances shatter, knights draw swords and keep going. Saladin's commanders try to hold the line, but you can't hold a line against this. Heavy cavalry isn't just a weapon, it's a force of nature. Imagine standing in a field and watching a wall of armored horses and screaming men coming at you at full speed. You have 2 choices: run or die. Most of Saladin's men choose to run. The center collapses first, then the left flank, then the right. Within minutes, 30,000 warriors are scattering in every direction. Some try to regroup. Richard's knights cut them down. Some try to flee to the hills. Richard sends infantry to hunt them. Saladin himself, the legendary Saladin, undefeated for a decade, barely escapes with his life. His personal bodyguard surrounds him. They fight their way out of the chaos, but his army is gone. 17 minutes. That's how long the charge lasted. By the time the dust settled, thousands of Saladin soldiers were dead. Thousands more were wounded, captured, or running for the desert. And Richard's losses? Minimal. A few dozen knights, maybe 100 infantry. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The battlefield at Arsuf is a graveyard. Bodies everywhere, broken weapons, dying horses. Richard's men are still in formation, bloodied, exhausted, but victorious. Richard himself rides through the field. He doesn't celebrate, doesn't smile. He just surveys. This is what he came here to do. Break Saladin. Show the Muslim world that the Crusaders were still a threat. And he did it. But here's what the history books leave out. This victory didn't just break Saladin's army, it broke his reputation. For years, Saladin was seen as invincible, the man who took Jerusalem, the man who united the Muslim world. After Arsuf, that image cracked. Muslim chroniclers, the ones who recorded this battle, were devastated. One wrote, "It was a day of disaster. The Sultan's army was scattered like leaves in the wind." Another said, "We thought we could never be defeated. Arsuf showed us otherwise." Saladin never fully recovered. He won smaller skirmishes after this. He held Jerusalem, but he never again faced Richard in open battle. He was too afraid. And Richard? Richard became a legend, not just in Europe, in the Muslim world too. They called him Malik al-Inkitar, King of England, but also al-Shaitan al-Ahmar, the Red Devil. They told stories about him for generations, how he could kill 10 men with one swing of his sword, how his horse breathed fire, how he once ripped a man's heart out with his bare hands and ate it. None of that is true, but the fact they said it shows how terrified they were. Now here's the part they don't teach you, the part that makes this story really dark. After Arsuf, Richard marched his army toward Jerusalem, but he knew something his men didn't. He couldn't take Jerusalem, not yet. His army was too small, his supply lines too weak. If he attacked the city, Saladin would trap him inside and starve him out. So Richard did something brutal. He made a deal with Saladin, in secret. Yes, you heard that right. After crushing Saladin's army, after killing thousands of his men, Richard sat down with him and negotiated. They met in private, no scribes, no witnesses. What they discussed we don't fully know, but we know the result. September 2nd, 1192, 1 year after Arsuf, Richard and Saladin signed the Treaty of Jaffa. The terms? Saladin keeps Jerusalem, but Christians get access to the holy sites. They can visit, pray, leave in peace. The coast stays in Christian hands, the interior stays Muslim. No more war. For now. When Richard's men heard about this, they were furious. They'd come here to take Jerusalem. They'd marched through hell, watched their friends die, and now their king, their warrior king, was making peace with the enemy? Some called him a coward. Some called him a traitor. But here's the truth historians won't say out loud. Richard didn't come here for God. He came here for glory, for reputation, for power. And once he had it, once he proved he could beat Saladin, he didn't need Jerusalem anymore. He got what he came for. But that's not even the darkest part. August 20th, 1191, 2 weeks before Arsuf, Richard's army is camped outside the city of Acre. They've just captured it after a brutal siege. Inside the city, 2,700 Muslim prisoners, soldiers, civilians, families. Saladin agreed to ransom them, pay Richard a fortune in gold, release Christian prisoners in return. But the deadline passes. Saladin's payment doesn't arrive. Maybe it was delayed, maybe it was a miscommunication, but Richard doesn't wait. He orders every single prisoner executed, all 2,700 of them. They're marched out of the city in chains. Richard's soldiers form a line, and they start killing. It takes hours. Men, women, children, stabbed, beheaded, thrown off cliffs into the sea. Muslim chroniclers say the blood ran so thick it stained the sand red for days. This is the man we call the Lionheart. This is the man England celebrates as a hero. And this massacre, this war crime by any modern definition, is barely mentioned in Western history books. Why? Because it complicates the narrative. We want Richard to be the noble king, the brave warrior. We don't want him to be a butcher. But he was both. And here's the thing that'll make you angry. Saladin, the so-called savage Muslim sultan, never did anything like this. When he took Jerusalem in 1187, he let the Christians leave. He could have slaughtered them. He had every military reason to do it. But he didn't. He let them walk out, gave them safe passage. Some he even let leave for free. Meanwhile, when Christians took Jerusalem in 1099 during the First Crusade, they killed everyone. Muslims, Jews, Christians who looked too Middle Eastern. 30,000 people butchered in 2 days. So, when you hear people talk about the clash of civilizations, when they say the Crusades were about good versus evil, remember this. Both sides did terrible things, but only one side gets called barbaric in your textbooks. You might be thinking, this happened 800 years ago. Why does it matter? Here's why. The Crusades never ended. Not really. We just stopped calling them Crusades. The same rhetoric, the same fear, the same propaganda. Us versus them. Civilization versus barbarism. Our God versus their God. It's still here. When politicians talk about the Middle East today, they use the same language Richard's priests used in 1191. When media covers conflict in Palestine, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, they frame it the same way. The Christian West versus the Muslim East, as if it's inevitable, as if it's always been this way. But history shows us something different. Richard and Saladin, two men who spent years trying to kill each other, ended up making peace. Not because they liked each other, but because they realized war wasn't working. And here's the thing no one talks about. After the Crusades ended, Christians and Muslims lived side by side in the Holy Land for centuries. They traded, they talked, they influenced each other's culture. Medieval Spain, Muslim Spain, was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. Christians, Muslims, and Jews worked together, built libraries, translated ancient texts. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. So when someone tells you the West and the Middle East can never coexist, when they say it's ancient hatred, religious destiny, remember Arsuf. Remember that even in the darkest moment of the Crusades, after the worst battles, the worst massacres, peace was still possible. Not easy, but possible. Let's go back to that battlefield. September 7th, 1191. Richard standing among the dead. What was he thinking? We don't know. He never wrote it down. But we know what happened next. He marched toward Jerusalem, got within sight of the walls, and turned back. His advisors were shocked. They'd come so far, sacrificed so much. Why stop now? Richard's answer was simple. Because I can't hold it. Even if he took the city, even if he won, Saladin's empire was too big, his resources too deep. Richard would be trapped in a city thousands of miles from home, surrounded by enemies. It would be a slow death. So he made peace instead. Here's the lesson. Winning a battle doesn't mean winning a war.
Richard crushed Saladin at Arsuf, completely dominated him, but he didn't win the crusade, because the crusade was never winnable, not by Richard, not by anyone. You can't conquer an entire civilization with 10,000 men. You can't hold a city when the whole world wants you gone. Richard understood that, and that's what makes him more than just a warrior. He was a strategist. He knew when to fight, and he knew when to stop. That's the part history forgets. We remember the charge, the glory, the bloodshed, but we forget the peace. We forget that after all the killing, both sides sat down and talked, and for a few years the Holy Land was quiet. The Battle of Arsuf lasted 17 minutes, but its consequences echoed for centuries. Saladin's reputation never fully recovered. Richard became a legend, even among his enemies, and the Holy Land kept bleeding. For 200 more years, Christians and Muslims fought over Jerusalem, tens of thousands dead, entire cities destroyed. And in the end, nobody won. The Crusades ended. The Crusaders went home. Jerusalem stayed Muslim until the Ottomans took it, then the British, then the Israelis. Every generation fights the same war, over the same land, using the same rhetoric. So, here's my question for you. What if we stopped glorifying the battles? What if we stopped making heroes out of men who killed thousands? What if, instead of celebrating Richard's charge, we celebrated the fact that he was smart enough to make peace? History doesn't have to be a weapon. It can be a mirror. And when we look into it, we should see ourselves, our wars, our hatred, our refusal to stop fighting. September 7th, 1191. Arsuf. 17 minutes that changed the world. Not because of the glory, but because it showed us the cost. And 800 years later, we still haven't learned.